We'll continue our coverage here on the Aussie Wire about energy, energy reliability, energy prices. Unfortunately, I have some bad news. In addition to shutting down reliable baseload energy, the governments, I say plural, governments, federal and state, keep on doubling down when it comes to these unreliable, non-dependable and extremely expensive so-called renewable energy sources. But that doesn't just come at a cost to us as consumers of electricity, it also is devastating for the areas where they're building these projects. These are food bowls, places that used to feed us and provide us with fibre for our clothing. Now all of a sudden they're being festooned with windmills and solar panels. Here to talk to me about that right now is Grant Piper. You're personally affected by this, aren't you, Grant?
Yeah, we've got power lines going over the corner of one of our properties, and we're going to be 3.5 k away from the nearest turbine on the ridge opposite us where we live. And the town of Coolah is going to be surrounded by about 350 250 metre turbines as well. It all began when we heard the announcement of the Central West Orana Res, and we'd never heard of anything before about this. There'd never been any consultation with the people, and you ended up in a res.
Now,
And now we're facing 37
for
projects
those that
in that
for those that
area.
aren't familiar, what's a res? What does that mean?
The New South Wales state government renewable energy zone, and there's several in the state, and it's some plan that the AMO, the Australian Energy Market Operator, came up with in conjunction with the state governments. And there's a New England res, there's a Riverina res, there's offshore reses they floated the idea of, and then we're in the Central West Orana res, and it's the lead res. I think they say, and it was earmarked to dispatch 3 gigawatt of power from that res, is what they're aiming for. But they've just put in a request to expand that to double it to 6 gigawatt.
Well, of course.
And so that mean another 37, another 40 projects at least to double the power.
But when we're talking about renewable energy, of course, those rated capacities are in a perfect scenario. That's what they're capable of when the wind is exactly right and the sun is in exactly the right position. We know that these sorts of projects, solar panels, wind farms, etc., they're unreliable. I mean, solar panel to a certain degree, you can predict, obviously, during the middle of the day, it's going to produce a lot more energy than it will during the middle of the night. But if thick clouds come in, you get a dramatic drop in energy production. Wind power, of course, can produce power at night, but we can never really be sure that it's going to be reliable. But putting all of that aside, we all understand that. Everyone that watches the Aussie Wire, we've been through this before. What's the impact on the landscape around you? And are they using wilderness, otherwise unusable land that wouldn't have had any other productive purpose, or are they actually doing this on farmland?
No, their first preference is always on cleared farmland, not state or crown land, because it's cleared, the fire risk is lower, and they'd rather negotiate with private landowners than state government bureaucracies themselves. And these are private companies that are proponents that are pushing these projects. So it's not all farming land, as in you're digging it up and you're growing crops, but it's grazing land, it's range country, which is it's all utilised and it's all productive. It's not it's not excuse me, it's not waste country in any way. No, it's highly productive, especially around Coolah. It's one of those areas that sort of got, a name for being reliable rainfall and good country. Yeah. Not that, there's even lesser country, but I mean, it's all productive and it's all, people have raised families, educated kids and made profits throughout their life and, supported the local community and done everything that needs to be done off that land. So it certainly isn't waste country. It's worth more than
Yeah.
A house in Toorak or Palm Beach that doesn't produce anything, in my opinion.
So you mentioned the lack of consultation. There's these solar farms going in. Some of these are on an incredible scale. It's hard to actually visualize just the scale of these going in. You mentioned the wind farms up to 250 meters. Now, look, full disclosure, as a piece of engineering, I find those windmills phenomenal. If you think about the forces involved, the size of these things, what they're actually achieving from an engineering sort of a geek perspective is phenomenal. But they make absolutely no sense from an energy production point of view. But there's also the energy transmission. Now, you mentioned the power lines cutting across the corner of your property. What sort of a say have you and other landowners around you had in what happens and what gets done to your own property now that you're in this renewable energy zone?
Well, for the power lines, we don't have, ultimately they have compulsory acquisition, so they can just bulldoze through and go, we're going to put it here,
Sure.
and you just got to suck it up. They write and say they don't want to do that. They'd like a negotiated, arrangement. Like they want you to acquiesce. They want you to basically accept that they're going to come and do it and acquiesce. Because when you've done that, you've given away any claim later
Sure.
on that you were coerced into it. And we've been through that before. We know how that works. So, yeah, at the moment, they've made an offer for compensation for that portion, and it's up to us to sort of start haggling and decide on how we're going to go ahead with that. But there's thousands of hectares of solar panels projected in this area. Like I've got friends down the road, and he's going to be surrounded by them. 1,400 hectares of solar panels, and that's in prime flat grazing farming country. And he didn't ask for that. And he's not a host, but he's going to be looking at it, and it's going to destroy the country because all the steel, all the concrete, you're never going to get it off the country again in 20 or 30 years. There's no rehabilitation bonds. So the proponents don't have to rehabilitate the country afterwards. And getting back to the turbines, yeah, there might be a feat of engineering, but something that's taller than the Harbour Bridge Arch, but shorter than Centrepoint Tower in Sydney. That's the scale of these things. And you've got 2,000 tonnes of concrete in the base, 2,000 tonnes of concrete. And they tell us that concrete's one of the worst, CO2 emitters out there, and that's going to stay there forever in the ground. It's never going to be removed, even if they pull the towers down. There's 600 tonnes of steel in the tower. There's hundreds of gallons of oil in the head. And then there's the carbon blades and the epoxy in the blades, which is made of bisphenol A, which is an endocrine disruptor. So that's going to affect fertility. I can't remember the exact dangerous amount, but it is a known endocrine disruptor. And so that's going to be, as those blades erode, you couldn't think of a better way to spread that over the country and into the waterways and affect all living things, not just humans, but animals, breeding animals, farmland. And as you say, food security. They're supposed to be worried about food security, but this is an absolute perfect way to destroy that. It ruins the production of the land, and the damage is permanent.
So, talk to me though about the solar panel side of things. There are some very real concerns about solar panels, the materials that they may leach from themselves. There are some soil tests have been done showing that lead levels have increased markedly over a 10-year period where there have been solar panels set up. How do you feel, and what's your opinion on the controls that are in place? I mean, this has all been done for environmental reasons. Let's remember the purpose, the supposed purpose, whether you agree with it or not. The argument is that this is for environmental reasons. Are environmental controls and monitoring in place to your satisfaction to see that happen on the land next to your own?
No, I don't think there is. It varies from state to state, but there is no monitoring of that. Even if the the DA gives them conditions on the development, they don't. There's no one monitoring the conditions from the government. It's up to the community. They say, "Oh, if you have a complaint, you bring it to our attention." So it's up to us to then police that they're complying. But that's like the current battle. You've got a bunch of, in raw terms, amateurs without the time and the resources necessarily to go and pursue, everything through the high court or what have you. And we're going to be the ones that have to police it as well. And then we've got to fight that battle down the road. But as I see it, the horse has already bolted by that stage. Our objective at this stage, and we might be a bit simple-minded, is that we've just got to stop it because it's just completely destructive. As you say, it's not technically sound in the supply of power. It won't ever do what they're saying it will do. And it's also economically destructive. You couldn't think of a more expensive way to produce bulk power. And then it's environmentally destructive because all the materials and manufacturing and rare earth minerals that are used in the solar panels, used in the turbines, they're all mined and transported and manufactured using fossil fuels somewhere else. And then we ship them here, put them up. And it's just it's out of sight, out of mind. For the people that think that's green, it's just a case of it looks green from, if they don't see the whole process. But in net terms, it's a net energy consumer and a net polluter. And out of that, you might get a few gigawatt of supposedly clean power, but then it'll only last 20 years. It's just crazy stuff. I can't think of any, intentionally that you could do to consume more, to force consumption on and it's just financial churn. That's the way I see it. It's fundamentally just another financial boondoggle that we're all going to pay for, and our children and our grandchildren, without ever doing the job that it's meant to do. I mean, I just see it as a detour, and in 5 or 10 years, I'll go, "Oh, this isn't working. We need nuclear." Well, I just say, "Well, just bypass this detour altogether and track direct to a new thermal power source on the existing sites using the existing transmission network, and don't do all this rubbish that's going to cause irreparable damage to us and
It's
farming."
extraordinary to think. I mean, I agree with everything that you've just said. I think that's a much more intelligent solution. I think in 10 to 20 years, we're going to realize what an incredible mistake we've made. Your point about the repatriation of the land is spot on. We've got such a task ahead of us. Think of what the early settlers in Australian farming country did to remove rocks, to remove stumps, to clear trees. Think of the backbreaking work involved in making this clear country that we can graze on and we can farm on and we can have crops on now. We're going to have to redo all of that to get all the concrete footings out from every single one of those solar panels, and as you say, 2,000 tons of concrete in the footing of every one of those wind turbines. Just insane. We need to bypass all of this. You're absolutely right. And I tell you what, it's nice to see that common sense still exists in this country. It's just unfortunate that it exists on farmland deep inside inland New South Wales and not in Canberra or in Sydney or in Melbourne, where these decisions are actually being made. Well, Grant Piper, thank you so much for joining us here on the Aussie Wire. We're going to stay up to date with this story and everything related to it. Energy is obviously a crucial issue. It's a crucial input into our entire economy. The cost and reliability of energy affects every single one of us. And what is happening out of sight, out of mind in the middle of New South Wales next to Grant Piper's property is something that affects us all. Grant, thank you so much for coming on the Aussie Wire.
Thanks for having me.